Alrighty, greetings, welcome all. I believe we've just gone live online. Great to see so many of you here, so many familiar faces and unfamiliar, and we're really thankful to have an online audience as well. So thank you all for coming, yeah, we'll jump right in. It's such a cliche at this point that I'm embarrassed to admit that I did this, but yesterday I consulted a variety of large language models for a joke that would be suitable for an AI and national security panel. And all three came back with like horribly unfunny one-liners that were unworkable or nonsensical, which made me feel a little good because I was like, okay, maybe we have some time. But then out of desperation, I said to one of them, I want darker humor. And immediately, it was like a list, it obliged, and I properly lolled. It was some good stuff, but nothing appropriate for a public panel. So you can ask me about optimizing for overpopulation later. This event is part of CNAS's AI Safety and Stability Project, which aims to better understand AI risks and specific steps that can be taken to improve AI safety and stability in national security applications. It's following on from the release last week of this report by the same name of this event, which in itself is a follow-on from an earlier report in June, which was a primer on AI and national security risks. We wanted to follow on from that report on bio specifically because, as I'm sure many of you know, bio has been kind of the lightning rod, the touch point for big, large-scale AI risks in national security that a lot of people have been worried about. There have been two kind of main issue sets of concern for folks. One, the one that's kind of received the most attention is large language models or frontier models or foundation models, choose your poison, enabling non-expert actors or terrorist actors for acts of bioterrorism, basically lowering the barriers to procuring or developing or launching bioweapons. The second that has gained some interest, though not as much and not as urgently, is future AI tools that may be able to help more resourced actors like state actors develop next generation bioweapons with more targeted effects. These concerns have reached the highest levels of government and industry. In a July 2023 congressional hearing, Dario Amodei, CEO of one of the leading labs, Anthropic, stated that within 2 to 3 years, there was a, quote, substantial risk the AI tools would, quote, greatly widen the range of actors with the technical capability to launch a large-scale biological attack. Former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also expressed urgent concern that there may only be a small window of time before AI enables a step change in bioterrorist capabilities. And Vice President Kamala Harris warned that the threat of, quote, AI-formulated bioweapons could endanger the lives of millions and could endanger the very existence of humanity. So obviously those are grave claims, and maybe the chatbots could only do dark humor because that's the only way you can joke about them. But we tried to place these grave concerns from AI safety circles into a broader national security framework to establish actionable recommendations for policymakers now and to give a sense of what capabilities we need to monitor for the future going forward as they evolve. There's not space in introductory remarks to go into all of those, so you'll have to read the report if you want the details on where we come down on what to watch and what to regulate and what to leave be. But I thought I would tee up this conversation by highlighting some of the most interesting themes for me, coming to this from the AI side, new to the bio side, about kind of the most interesting themes now that the dust is really beginning to settle on a flurry of AI bio reports that followed the launch of ChatGPT. So 4 broader considerations that are wholly Bill's opinion. And we'll have a more diverse set of opinions shortly. So 1, the contentious debate about how AI might enable non-experts and less resource groups in bioterrorism is actually an added layer on a debate about bioterrorism that was already pretty polarized and had a pretty wide range of opinions. AI safety groups have often not fully considered the progress and insights that that debate, independent of AI, has produced. And as I get into the report, that was one of the most illuminating parts for me, was diving into that kind of debate. Second, the history of state-led bioweapons programs is actually pretty wild. Highly recommend. From a contemporary perspective, and that's in part because state activity on this front has been relatively quiet in recent years, and in recent decades, for that matter. If, and that's a really big if AI tools are able to produce bioweapons with truly novel capabilities in targeting, that would be a really big deal in reviving a history and a set of strategic incentives that most of us don't think about because they've largely gone dormant. That's a little underappreciated, I think, in the discourse. 3, the impact of AI on biorisks, I think, could prove significant. We're still tracking that, but may not be the most pressing risk for American biosecurity, despite having garnered all of this attention, particularly in a world of regular lab leaks and growing numbers of high-security biolabs, independent of AI. Obviously not entirely separable, but you take my point. And fourth and finally, it is so important to hammer out what we mean, what we plan to do about these changing risks in our own legal and commercial ecosystems. But these dangers in particular don't respect national borders. And so the most severe risks may actually come from abroad, especially China. That was one theme that has kind of been a recurring theme in work on AI risks in general and biorisks in particular. Setting aside the Wuhan Institute debate, if you had rewound to pre-COVID, you still would have found a lot of indicators that there are very severe risks from China where we have very limited influence. That can be easily forgotten in these debates and in these discussions. So we need to think at least as hard about what to do with threats emanating from abroad, outside of our control, as much as we do about what we do to kind of create and hopefully internationalize best practices at home. We often get fixated on the latter to the exclusion of the former. So, having given kind of an overview of some of my broad hot takes from having written this report, again, if you want anything more specific, you'll have to see the report. I'd like to invite our panelists on stage, and I will introduce them, and then I'll kick us off with a couple intro questions, but then we'll turn it over to the audience, both in person and online. So please. Is this on? Great. Okay, here we go. So I'll introduce from nearest to me to farthest to me. So closest to me, we have Dr. Sonia Ben-Wagram Gormley, who is an associate professor at George Mason University's Schar School of Policy and Government and deputy director of the school's biodefense graduate program. She holds a PhD in economics of development from EHESS. I did not attempt to pronounce that French school in Paris, France. As well as graduate degrees in strategy and defense policy, foreign languages, and law. Her research focuses on areas at the crossroads between science, emerging technologies, and national and international security. And maybe most directly relevant here, she is the author of the book, Barriers to Bioweapons, The Challenges of Expertise and Organization for Weapons Development. Anita Cicero, to her left, is deputy director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Public Health Security and a senior scientist at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She's a lawyer and has worked for years on governance issues related to dual-use life sciences research. She's currently a leader on a WHO advisory committee tasked with thinking through governance frameworks for AI and bio. And she's a graduate of Yale Law School and Oberlin College. And finally, we have Dr. Steph Guerra, who is a molecular biologist and biosecurity expert who currently serves as a senior advisor at the U.S. Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute, where she leads the Institute's efforts on the intersection of AI and biotechnology. Steph previously served in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2021 to 2024, where she led the development and implementation of national security and technology efforts, including the National Biodefense Strategy and the Artificial Intelligence Executive Order. She received her PhD in biological and biomedical sciences from Harvard University and her BS in biological sciences and BA in Hispanic studies from Carnegie Mellon. So a lot of experience stacked up here on the stage. Really excited to dig in. Final reminder, I'll go to audience questions right after these two that I'm about to pose. So get your questions prepared. And to our online audience, we're watching for your questions in the chat box. We're watching out for your questions in the chat box online and on the hashtag CNAS 2024. So just indicate with that hashtag if you'd like to ask a question. So the first question we have, what do you think gets most lost in public discussions on how AI is impacting biorisks? And maybe I'll start nearest me and we can go down the line.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and meet you all, and I hope we'll have some more discussion later on. But for me, so I study AI, or look at AI from the perspective of building or producing biological weapons. And for me, there are three major issues that get lost when we talk about how AI can help produce or research biological weapons. And the first one is, I think the most important one for me, is that we talk about what AI could do, all of the information that AI can provide, almost independently of the process of building, developing biological weapons. And that gives the impression that producing biological weapons with all of the information that AI can provide is easy, straightforward, and you just need the information to produce the weapons. And we know from historical analysis that producing biological weapons is very complex, very complicated. It's a multi-stage process, and it's not stages that are implemented like in a conveyor belt, one after the other. They have to be integrated with each other. So it's very complicated, and that requires the involvement of people who have specific expertise, who represent different disciplines. And when they work together, they create different kinds of knowledge. And that knowledge is not necessarily contained in the data that AI might provide. So that's one of the biggest issues for me. The second one, I think, is the issue of the quality and the usability of the data that is provided by AI. We know that AI provides a lot of inaccurate data. There are hallucinations. But even if we assume that there was no hallucination, and there's a lot of data out there that's inaccurate, that's not usable for the users, and sometimes not relevant at all. So that implies that the user needs to have at least knowledge of the field, expertise in the field, in order to be able to sort out all this data, to determine what's an hallucination, what's accurate, what's not accurate, etc. And once they've done that, they need to be able to adapt the data, translate it to their own purposes, to their own project. And we know, again, from experience in the science field, life sciences, but also in bioweapons development, that this process of translation to a new field to your own purposes is something that's very complicated, and it can take years. It's not just a matter of a few weeks or a few months. So that's the second, I think, issue that's lost in the discussion. And the third one, and I'll stop here, the third issue, I think, is even if you assume that AI provided only accurate information, relevant information, usable information, that does not change the nature of the agents that are used for bioweapons. It doesn't change the nature of biology. And all of the agents that are used are unpredictable. They are unpredictable throughout the research production process, but also they are unpredictable when used as a bioweapon. So the key challenge really is not so much to acquire all of the information, but it's to develop that expertise required to know how to manipulate those agents in order to give them and keep and maintain their characteristics throughout the research and development process, and of course, use as a weapon. So, in short, these are, I think, the basic ideas that are lost when we discuss AI. We focus too much on what AI can provide and could do without placing that in the process of bioweapons development.
Thank you. Anita.
Good. Thank you so much. So this will be a good conversation to have, because my first point is that I think that public discussions, especially over the last year or so around AI risk, really underestimate the potential risk of even the very next generation of models that we could see within this year or in the next few years. And because of that, I think we've been a little bit lulled into this false sense that we have the luxury of time to think through governance measures and what we need to put in place, because all that, as we know, in the policymaking community is quite time intensive. I think that that kind of underestimation is understandable, because there were really very high quality and I'm sure rigorous safety evaluations and red teaming efforts done last year, and I'm sure some this year, by RAND, by Griffin Scientific, and by the companies themselves, either with external experts or with internal red teams. And so I don't at all undervalue how important and good those evaluations and red teaming efforts were. But you know, I think we need to listen to the AI developers about the potential capabilities of the next generation. And I'll just make a couple points, you know, jumping off of that. And first is that I think we still think about looking at the risks that are related to large language models only, and assuming they're just like chatbots, they're just predicting the next word. And a lot of the evaluations done so far, and rightfully so, have been on LLMs, because those general models are large and powerful, have a lot of compute. We have generally, up until now, been thinking, well, biological design tools, or BDTs, are less worrisome for now. They are smaller. They use less compute. They don't, you know, they have smaller data sets that they are trained on, and they're in silico, so they're safely in a computer rather than being translated into reality or through scientific experiments. But I think that we need to not put in different boxes LLMs and BDTs and cloud labs, but instead be thinking of a future in the relatively near term where LLMs could use and grab onto biological design tools to perform specific tasks and be able to obtain a design for a novel pathogen that may be transmissible and more lethal than what we have seen so far. And then orders could be placed to a cloud lab that works 24/7 using automated robotics to actually perform some of those, to perform those experiments and do trial and error to try to advance it. I completely agree that there are a zillion mini steps and larger steps along the way that will be a challenge. But that leads me to my second point on this, which is that if we listen to the AI researchers, what they have reported and what we've all seen is the exponential growth every couple years, and now it seems like maybe every year, in the compute power and the algorithmic efficiencies of these models that even can lead to needing less compute power, and then also in efforts to be able to work out the kinks that AI has to reduce the hallucinations and to fix some of those problems that have hobbled us so far. And many in this room and others watching may have seen or heard of a new report that an AI researcher named Leo Aschenbrenner recently put out. He used to be an engineer at OpenAI, and he wrote a report called Situational Awareness, where he talks about this exponential orders of magnitude growth in these 3 different areas and what it could lead to. And in that report, and also comments that Dario Modai from Anthropic and others have made, I think they're sort of like the researchers who are building these models say even in 2027, we could be at a place where AI itself could produce 100 million top-notch AI researchers who work at 100 times the speed of the best AI researchers available to improve the models. And I'm frankly excited from a public health perspective of thinking of 100 million chief scientific officers from Pfizer who, working 100 times the speed of the one that they have to get medical breakthroughs. But I think we need to understand that with those incredible benefits, there'll be an increasing level of risk that we should be preparing for now.
Great, thank you. It seems like we're having some diverging emphases at least, which we welcome. On to Steph.
Yeah, maybe I can bridge the gap here. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. I really enjoyed reading the report. I think it brought a lot of new perspectives to the discourse. So thank you for producing it and putting it out in the world. Before I answer this really great question, I think my answer will actually bridge some of the discussion that's already been had. I wanted to take a few steps back to sort of describe the government perspective that I'm bringing to this conversation. And to do that, I want to talk a little bit about what the U.S. AI Safety Institute is and what we do. So we are a brand new organization within the federal government. We are housed at the Department of Commerce under the Secretary Gina Raimondo's leadership within the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And so what's really exciting about us being within NIST is we get to add to this 120-year storied history of advancing science, standards, research and development of the world's most advanced technologies in order to enable America's greatest innovations. And so at the U.S. AI Safety Institute, we have a couple of goals. First is to advance the science of AI safety. Second is to address the risks of the world's most highly capable AI models as they are released. And third is to really begin to enable safe innovation of AI, both here in the United States and around the world. And so my role at the U.S. AI Safety Institute is to lead our biosecurity efforts across all 3 of those tracks. How do we actually achieve that? Well, there's 3 different pillars that we are we are doing over the course of the next several months to years. First is around testing and evaluation. Second is around standards and guidance development. And third is around catalyzing fundamental research. So biosecurity is just one of many potential risks that AI could pose that our institute is addressing. And so to get back to the question that was posed around what is lost in the public discourse around biosecurity, I think what's lost is that there's a lot of nuance here. So I think it's non-controversial to say as a statement of policy that an AI system should not enable the development of a chemical and biological weapon. It seems very black and white. But when you look under the hood, there's a lot of shades of gray there. So our institute released at the end of July a set of guidance around managing the misuse risks of dual-use foundation models. Within that guidance, which is now open for public comment, so encourage everyone to take a look and submit your public comments by September 9th, within that guidance, it describes some of the key challenges that we face on the ground when thinking about how to operationalize AI safety. And one of those challenges is particularly relevant for biology. which is the fact that the relationship between these assessed and observed capabilities of AI models are often not having a direct correlation to the real world risks. And we need to better understand that relationship. And so one of the big focus areas for my team is to help catalyze the next generation of biorisk evaluations for AI models that have a more direct relationship and correlation between actually enabling scientific capabilities in the real world in a laboratory setting. And so what was great about the report is that there outlined a number of those types of capabilities that we should seek to better understand within these models. And so part of what our work can seek to do is to develop those evaluations on those proxy tasks that can actually tell us about what those capabilities are of the AI models and how they could enable nefarious actors. The second shade of gray that exists here, which I think was brought up by both of the speakers, is that when we're thinking about these biological risks, the capabilities that we're assessing that could enable a nefarious actor to misuse biology, those same capabilities could be used by legitimate researchers to do good and amazing things and solve some of our greatest problems. And so this dual-use conundrum is really challenging and is part of how we need to assess these capabilities. And when we're getting into the mitigation piece of these risks, we have to be aware of the fact that as we are recommending certain mitigations, there's a real possibility that those mitigations could erode on some of the beneficial capabilities that these AI models are designed to do. And so a good example of this within biology is the fact that many models are currently being designed to help aid scientists in their laboratory work through laboratory automation, laboratory troubleshooting, and this is the purpose of these models. And so the challenge that exists, and it's a non-trivial challenge, is how can we assess these capabilities and mitigate them while also enabling this good work to happen. And so my work at the US AI Safety Institute is to convene the community around these challenges. We can't do this alone. We'll have to work with civil society, model developers themselves, other parts of the industry to come to consensus on what these risks are, how do we assess them and tie them to capabilities, and how can we begin to mitigate them.
Thank you. Great. So last question before we kick it to the audience. As AI technologies progress, what areas of biosecurity or biopreparedness do you think require the most attention going forward? I don't know if we want to. I'll not make you speak twice in a row. We'll start here and then we'll go down again.
Again, for me, because we don't know very well, we talk a lot about what LLM can do, but we don't know very much what they actually can do in a laboratory setting and as applied to potentially producing biological weapons. I think one of the most important things today is to learn more about, understand better what they can and cannot do, and develop new regulations. I'm not against regulations. I don't think we should not regulate. But before we do that, we absolutely need to better understand the capability itself, and then assess, that will allow us to assess better the risks associated with those. So that's one area. The second area, I think, is if we focus too much on the catastrophic risks that are potentially in the future, far away, we might lose sight of the most present, imminent, and most likely risks. And one of them, which we are seeing, or have been seeing in the past few years, is the risk of using LLM for mis and disinformation. We see it in the political campaign, but there's a risk of using them during a health crisis. Russia has been quite good at using misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic. They've been quite good at using mis and disinformation about US biological weapons, alleged biological weapons activities in the former Soviet Union or other countries in the world. there's a great risk that they use LLMs to further these and disinformation campaigns, not only about biological weapons activities, but also during future health crises. So I think for me, we should not lose track or lose sight of the most pressing and the most likely threat, instead of always thinking about the most dangerous threat.
Good, thank you. I really like this question about what are the most pressing risks to worry about now, because it assumes that prioritizing and trying to at least focus on risk mitigation for the most concerning risks would be a good idea. And I think that already both in the U.S. and in Europe and through the international AI safety summits, there's already been a recognition that cyber, biochem, nuclear, and cybersecurity risks deserve extra attention in terms of risk mitigation because of the potential bad outcomes that they could bring about if misused. So I think that our job now is within, and I think that is what your report is trying to do, and your work as staff in the government is to look at what are the most concerning possible outcomes from a biological weapons risk perspective, and what kinds of capabilities in models would produce those outcomes, so that when we do safety evaluations and red teaming exercises, we can kind of at the bare minimum at least be looking for those things for the models. And the most concerning things in my mind are really those that would create pathogens with pandemic or even large-scale epidemic potential. So things that are that can spread easily between people. I definitely think it's important to say that doesn't mean it's existential risk. So we should only look at the worst possible existential risk outcomes and focus too much attention on that. Nor do I mean that we should focus on pandemic level risks at the exclusion of other risks that might be easier to achieve and still would take lives. But if we look at what is the most impactful, we should at least be testing models for capabilities that lead in that direction. And I do commend your report for looking at those capabilities. We have also been working hard to identify what those kinds of capabilities would be, and in particular looking at capabilities of models that could lead to increasing transmissibility of existing pathogens while still allowing them to retain their fitness and to not burn out quickly. Thinking about the use of large sensitive data sets and creation of maybe new biological constructs, and designing those constructs and being able to make those constructs. So I think that in the last last few months, it seems like there is a movement in that direction, understanding that we can't do everything. I think that the community is really on a learning curve still in terms of how to do a good evaluation. And up until now, the evaluations that have been done sort of you can't test for everything, so you pick a smattering of things, different bioweapons, and judge the capabilities of the models to create those outcomes. But sprinkling salmonella on a cellular is very different than releasing a new pandemic pathogen. So I think it is that's an appropriate place to prioritize. I know the Frontier Models Forum is doing a lot of good work in trying to also learn from experts about what are the most concerning priorities. Our Center for Health Security has been working with RAND as well and meeting with experts to try to investigate that question, see if there's consensus among experts and scientists on those questions, so that we can then inform the development of new evaluations to test for those capabilities.
Great, thank you. I love this question because it's the type of question I thought about every day while I was at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So how do you prioritize the whole panoply of potential actions within biosecurity, and where you decide to focus both your time, attention, and resources? When we think about this in a sort of in the context of the intersection of AI and biotechnology, I think one of the most important themes to really emphasize across the entire biodefense enterprise is the concept of deterrence. How do we ensure that a malicious actor decides not to use biology as their weapon of choice? And so at the AI Safety Institute, we're tackling one piece of this puzzle, which is those technical capabilities. How do we ensure that AI doesn't make it easier to misuse biology, and in that way then deters an actor from seeking to use it in the first place? And so that's the work that we're doing through our testing and evaluation, our guidance development to help ensure improved adoption of AI safety by model developers, by model adopters, by model deployers. And so it's really exciting work, and it's something that we're not doing alone. So we have an AI Safety Institute consortium that has over 200, I think it's over 250 members at this point, folks from all different sectors of society. So we have the model developers themselves, organizations like Johns Hopkins, as well as sort of the verticals like the healthcare sector, economic sector, et cetera. And so we get to work with them in order to identify capabilities that should be tracked, how to assess them, how to think through mitigations. And so that's been really exciting. I think also we are excited to be working in the global ecosystem. So the Secretary of Commerce announced recently that the U.S. AI Safety Institute will be leading a network of AI safety institutes from across the world, and we will be launching that network this fall. And so again, this is work that requires multiple perspectives. So that sort of technical deterrent piece is something that we're tackling head on. In addition to that, another concept around deterrence, which I'm sure Sonia actually knows this a lot better, is looking at sort of the historical use of BW and better understanding what are the motivators of folks that have decided to develop or use biological weapons. And how can we help deter them from being motivated to do that? And one way to do that is by lessening the potential impact that a biological weapons attack could have. So investing in biosurveillance, new detection methodologies, attributions, to make it less attractive to use biological weapons. So I think when we're considering deterrence as an overall strategy, we need to work hand in hand with folks outside of the government, as well as our federal government partners, on these things that are not necessarily thought of when you think of AI and biotechnology, but certainly have an effect on the potential misuse of biology. And I see I have a DHS colleague here in the room. I hope there's others from other parts of the government on the line, but this is really important work that is essential to what we're trying to achieve in preventing misuse of AI and biology.
Thank you. And I love to see the references to biohistory, biosecurity history in both of these last two comments. The salmonella on the salad bars, for those who don't know, refers to a 1970s attack in Oregon from a 70s, am I right? 80s, okay.
Good thing you have
yes, this is our resident biohistory expert, in which a religious commune wanted to influence or tip the scales of a local election in their favor, so they made everyone else, made a section of the population sick to tip the scales. Anyway, with that, I'll open it up to questions. I may interject with some online that I'm getting on this iPad here, but if anyone in the room wants to kick us off, yes, in the back.
Perfect. Hello, my name is Gary Lopez. I'm a security researcher at Microsoft, and I had a question for Dr. Anita Cicero. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Center for Health Security work on the prioritization of AIX biorisks. Thank you.
I'm happy to. So the way we've prioritized it, looking at those capabilities, is really to focus on two primary things, like outcomes that we're worried about. So the first outcome would be the creation of, novel new pathogen variants, novel a whole new biological constructs of pathogens that could be more transmissible and more lethal. The second thing we worry about would be reanimation of extinct pathogens or pathogens like smallpox that are only kept in a few laboratory repositories. And for both of those types of outcomes, worried about creation of pandemics, not just in humans, but also animals, plants, and the environment. And so with those two sort of guiding lights, then we have gone through, and this is where we have gathered experts and scientists along with RAND, and earlier in June we had a meeting with experts to talk through, assuming these are the two outcomes we want to avoid, what are the model capabilities that would be most concerning? And we're about to publish a report on that, Gary, so I'll make sure that to send you a copy of that. And there are a number of things that sort of bubbled up, but I think the underlying theme is that capabilities that could increase the transmissibility of very lethal pathogens while retaining their fitness over time. And different ways of doing that, and the creation or assistance in facilitating the creation of viral vectors that would be able to be used to help infect people with pathogens that can evade immunity, either natural immunity or vaccine-derived immunity. So it's those kinds of things. I know that I also participated on a Frontier Models Forum call. Chris Messerall's doing a lot of good work, also gathering groups of diverse set of experts, asking for their input as well. And he had sort of a different process or methodology, but I think it's really trying to drive towards the same kind of thing, and I'm sure that's what Steph is thinking about too in the government, of what are the capabilities of concern. And I think for the companies, they're in a hard spot of not being biosecurity historians or biosecurity scientists or experts, so they're really looking for that kind of input and for the red teaming. So I appreciate that.
This one next in the front.
Thank you. Hi. I'm Aparupa Sengupta from Nuclear NTI Bio, Global Biological Policy and Programs. So my question is for Steph. So we, in 2023, wrote up a report on AI Bio, and one of the recommendations of the report was to create an AI Bio forum. And so we convened it this year, the inaugural one, basically identifying stakeholders from all across the world globally. And the idea of the forum was, we had multiple objectives, but one of the objectives was to kind of bring everybody together, because Global North has been very dominant on a lot of research and frontier models and other capabilities versus Global South. So we kind of wanted to bring a platform where people come together and talk about it. So one of the things that I really wanted to ask you, and I wanted to appreciate for you having that AI Safety Institute network, I think that is extremely helpful. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about it, when it's going to launch, which countries is going to be going to be launched, and that would be great to know, and who are on there on the AI Safety Institute. But what I wanted to say is that the AI Bio Forum we convened, what we noticed there's a lot of discrepancy in terms of everybody's concerned about AI, but the way North is viewing versus South is a little different, because they are still using AI in different aspects of just say building their bioeconomy in different ways, but they are really not aware of the intricacies of how AI models could impact, or the biodesign tool models could impact in a negative manner. And so it was very difficult to bring them on to talk about the risk. Risk is not their, let's just say, favorite topic to discuss. So we kind of said vulnerability reduction and things like that. But all in all, the consensus was that they are not on the same page. They did not understand the challenges as much we did on this side. So what is the best way of bringing them together? Because as we know, as was discussed also, if there's a risk that kind of poses itself, it's going to transcend borders. It's not going to stay in one border. So what is your perspective on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that and sharing those initial findings. I've had some good conversations with your team about the forum that you have in progress already, and so we're excited to find areas of collaboration there. I think in terms of more information about the AI Safety Institute network, it'll be launched sometime this fall. We haven't yet announced the exact date, but we're planning to convene as much as possible the technical experts from these countries to have really substantive conversations, not just about biosecurity, but across all the different types of risks that our institute has been focused on, including cybersecurity risks, socio-technical risks, risks associated with synthetic content. So it's going to be a wide-ranging discussion, and we're excited for the launch event. I'm happy to follow up with more information exactly about the countries. There's 10 of them. I'm not on the international team, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But in terms of your question related to incorporating the Global South into these conversations, one member country I do know of specifically is Kenya. And the reason Kenya has been really forward-leaning on this front kind of builds off their state visit they had here earlier this year and the conversations with the White House. And so they're going to be one of the founding members of this network. So it's a priority for us to engage outside of the global north, and glad to hear that it is for you as well. I think you bring up a really important point when it comes to assessing these risks. This field is so nascent, right? So a lot of the leading players in this space when it comes to evaluating biorisk have been doing this work for a year, maybe a year and a half, and that's primarily focused on the text-based LLMs, not even going into the multimodal LLMs, and certainly not starting to assess the biodesign capabilities of these smaller tools. So that's what I think is an exciting opportunity for us at the US AI Safety Institute is to better understand the current state of play. And we've been engaging with a number of these model developers that are focused on these smaller scale, narrow bio AI tools to understand how do they conceptualize biosecurity? And many of them, encouragingly, actually do have approaches already, right? And so what our goal is to understand what's currently being done, build consensus around what is effective, what needs more work, what maybe erodes on capabilities that the tools are designed for. And so it's early days, but we're excited because I think the work that you're leading internationally and the way in which we can kind of be a convener and clearinghouse to understand the current set of assessments and mitigations is going to be really valuable.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with one from online. So James has asked, are there current existing policies related to biorisk, biosecurity, biopreparedness that you particularly think need to be strengthened in a world of advancing AI? I'll ask that broadly to the panel. Anyone can jump in. Looks like Anita's got something.
I thought of something. I think that we've been making progress on this in the U.S., but more needs to be done, and especially around the world, on gene synthesis screening. So the screening of nucleic acid the synthetic orders. Right now in laboratories around the world, some funded by government, some privately funded, researchers can order synthetic gene sequences from providers of those sequences, or they can purchase desktop synthesizers from manufacturers of those products and create new synthetic compounds or bits of them. And so we have made a lot of progress in the U.S. over the past year with the new policies that are taking effect in October of this year that that basically require laboratories who receive U.S. federal funding for their research to only order from providers who screen their sequences, and for the providers that that they also need to screen their customers. And this is a great step forward because it really helps to prevent that digital to physical jump of taking something, you know, in silico in the design and realizing it in a laboratory setting. But that being said, the new policy doesn't cover non-federally funded research, and it also I'm not aware of any other similar kind of effort, policy, let alone law, in the rest of the world. And there are a lot of other providers of this kind of material in the rest of the world. So I think that's a good area to be strengthened.
Thank you. We also get into this in the report. I'll save it for the report, but there is also the International Gene Synthesis Consortium, which has some sort of baseline kind of agreements, and has pretty good coverage of most advanced sequencers at the moment, even if the screening is not standardized. But there are notable exceptions from notable other countries. Anyone else want to jump in on this question before we head to another one?
First of all, thanks for flagging that. That was sort of one of the projects I was helping to lead while I was at OSTP, and my colleagues have been really pushing it forward really hard. I'll also say in my new home at NIST, the labs are doing a lot of really good work around better understanding how to set standards for the best practices and how to encourage these companies to do screening in an effective way. Of course, AI influences that, right? So as AI may or may not have improved capabilities of biological design, it interacts with how we can better detect if someone's trying to misuse biology. So I think the approach we're taking at the AI Safety Institute, this is a clear example of it, is identifying a potential capability of concern. So whether an AI model could help someone to design a pathogen in a way that it's not picked up by synthesis screening, so evading synthesis screening. So tracking the ability of the model to do that, and then using that information to feed back to mitigations that occur in the real world. And so I think we'll begin to see other types of examples of that across the board in terms of where we think AI is going to have the strongest impact on the real world capabilities of different actors, and then that can help to inform where we need to strengthen those real world mitigations.
Great. Okay, a bunch. I'll start. I think I saw in the middle here on the left first. My left, I guess.
Thank you. Steph Vitalis at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology. And thank you all for bringing up this idea of context. And so given that, you know, we know that there have been decades of discussion and challenges around how to define what constitutes an acceptable level of risk, I mean, looking at conversations around P3CO and DIRC and federal select agents, just to name a few, how do you see AI risk assessments fitting into this broader challenge of there being disagreements around what's an acceptable level of risk and how to define that, especially when a prediction is at play when risk is uncertain? Thank you.
Great question. If anyone wants to jump in first.
I mean, in those discussions about risk and acceptable risk, I think the starting point always need to be to understand better the technology. And we've done, I mean, since 2001 at least, and before, even before, we've had the same narrative every time there was a new technology or a new scientific approach, projecting in the future and thinking about the potential catastrophic risks associated with this technology. Before AI, it was CRISPR. And 10 years ago, when CRISPR was developed as a tool for the laboratory, there were discussions about using CRISPR not only for designer babies, but also for super soldiers and developing biological weapons, etc. And a problem that appeared early in the use of CRISPR was the problem of off-target effects. And at the time, in the early years, this problem was downplayed, and the idea was as the technology develops, then the problem will be solved. Here we are, about 12 years later, and off-target effect is still a big problem today. And CRISPR didn't help with the development of designer babies or super soldiers, etc. So I think before we determine what are the acceptable levels of risks, we really need to do empirical studies and understand how the technologies are used in the laboratory, in actual settings, what are the challenges that the scientists face in using that technology, and how they solve these problems. And are there any problems that are not ready to be solved and that decrease the level of risk? I think that's, in my view, what we should do to determine what's the acceptable level of risk or what's not.
And just to quickly add in, I think that that is like a central and very knotty question of, how do we unravel that? And something that we have struggled with over the years. I think because of the great positive upside and potential that AI brings, that's why we are more inclined to say, okay, let's just ensure that the most consequential type of risks won't be brought about from AI models, and maybe they don't need to be 100% safe, right, before we go forward, because we don't want to unnecessarily slow down development. But again, you don't only want to look for the highest end risk, because the ones that are easier to achieve and maybe right around the corner are also of concern. So I think it will continue to be an issue of just trying, over time to get that right. But I know that the companies too say, are we supposed to determine the acceptable level of risk for all of society? So they're in a difficult place as well.
Great. We are coming up on time. Probably one more question, so I will arbitrarily choose the front row.
Thank you. My name is Hamza Chaudhry. I lead AI and national security efforts in DC for the Future of Life Institute. I have a question on the language aspect of evaluations. So I was talking to someone from a security group who was setting up this experiment where you're pretending to be a Taliban offshoot in northeast Kashmir, and you're going to launch a bioweapons attack on Mumbai. And the question is, how much does AI help? And my question was, and they're speaking fluent English in this, that's completely silly. And all of these reports you read overly focus on English evaluations. And we made the same mistake with social media to our detriment a decade ago. And a lot of our means of content moderation across the board are also overly focused on English across the supply chain. So whether it comes to the kill chain for a bioweapon across the development and deployment lifecycle, or disinformation post-deployment, non-English languages have a huge role to play there. And I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
I think that's a very good point. It's important to spread the message in all of the languages that are necessary, so people understand not only the risks, but also the lack of risks, right, or the difficulties of producing biological weapons. That's something that I've been trying to push for a few years to when you talked about deterrence, my view was we should, instead of pursuing deterrence, we should pursue dissuasion and prevent anyone from entering the field of biological weapons. That's a better option, in my view, than deterrence, because deterrence implies that you respond to a threat that already exists. So by spreading the message that biological weapons are difficult, there are challenges in the scientific field, etc., in all of the languages possible, I think that will help with dissuasion and with preventing people from entering the field at all.
Yeah, and thank you so much for raising this. I think this is one of the particular types of efforts that we're hoping will sort of emanate from this global network that we're launching, because like you said, these risks occur across the world, and the best way to understand how to assess these risks, how to educate these communities, is to engage directly with the folks that are in those potential those countries. So this is definitely sort of on our radar and agenda.
Great. Well, we are at time, so if you'll join me in thanking our panelists. And thank you also for great in-person and online questions. We will see you next time. Please keep an eye on the work of CNAS and everyone up here. So thank you again.